effective is to pass it all the way through the body and have it ready to go over to the House in case they don't give us a bill. And the preferred strategy remains to work with the House bill. But whether that'll work or not, I don't know. Would remind the committee again, the Article 7, Section 9, the guidance we get there is legislature shall further provide, will create and maintain a thorough and efficient system of public schools, adequate to the proper instruction. And since the recalibration committee and the instructions that they got didn't involve going through the basket, we really haven't been able to do any of that in a meaningful way. So we're really concentrating on the efficient aspect of it. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I have developing some real reservations about the basket of goods, a little suspicion that it is, they threw in everything in the kitchen sink and are losing focus. And that's, I think, not helpful, but that's an issue for another day. With that, we have 13 amendments, and I can either explain them all and we can vote on them later, or we can vote on them as we go, which would, I think, be my preference. I think it'd be a little more efficient. And then I don't know, do you have any more, Chris? Effie? Okay. The first one, we talked about this, and we modified it after we talked about it on Monday. What it does is, and these aren't in any particular order in the bill. I think they're in the order in which LSO got them done, which in part was in order, the order in which they got them, and partly how complicated they were. What we're doing is replacing some language on 45 and 46 relating to groundskeepers with this new provision here. Each district groundskeeper salary shall not be adjusted by AV, which I think is the health insurance benefits, and then the retirement benefits. The theory being that if you can privatize them, that you can save that amount. We looked for a way to speak to the privatization in the bill and couldn't find it without causing other difficulties and impinging too much on the flexibility. But that's the assumption, is that they will be privatized. That's a classic thing that can be privatized, and that's the savings that would result. The second part of the amendment, page 50, line 12, and page 50, lines 8 through 22, that removes the across the board cut. And the first I heard of that proposition was when I sat in via Zoom on the last recalibration committee amendment. They brought it up, and as I remember, Senator Ruffus, you were pretty eloquent against that. And I looked at that and said, you know, he's right. Just dead
Mr.
right.
Chairman, you should say that more often.
Well, I'll say it when it's true. And relevant. You get in some things I don't. But that's what it does, is it gets rid of that across the board cut. I didn't like that, and I believe you said something of the same to me, Senator Ellis. I didn't like that when I first heard it, and Chris really crystallized my feelings on that. So that's what it does, is it gets rid of that. And I put it in here only in case politically we had some people that were just married to that approach. And I don't detect any of that, so we'll get rid of it. So that's the First Amendment. Hear a motion on the amendment? Any questions on the amendment?
Move the amendment.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
I divide the amendment
okay,
into the two separations, so Division 1 is lines 1 through 11, Division 2 is line 12.
okay, 1 through 11 is the groundskeeper issue.
Yeah.
You have a problem with that?
Yeah. I'm really not going to support any cuts, so.
Okay, fair enough.
Senator Ralphus, can you please put your mic on?
My apologies. Yep. And I'm going to repeat that then for the sake of me not having my mic on. Division 1 will be 1 through 11. Division 2 will be 12 through 14. On 1 through 11, which is the groundskeepers. To me, again, this isn't a cost-based decision. It's just really trying to focus on cuts instead of better education, better efficiency. I do understand the suggestion, but again, we have a block grant model. Cuts to the block grant model, in my view, at this point, will always be unconstitutional, and so I won't be able to support them. So unless we do a lot of things differently, on and against Division 1.
Okay, well, I will say that I think we do have a mandate to be efficient, and particularly this one. We're talking about trying to get efficiency in keeping grounds, and I don't see how that has much of anything to do with the quality of education. So, and the way we're structured, we just have to go through the model and look at them.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, if I may, a quick response to that.
Okay.
If we're going through the recalibration and doing cost-based, this might be something that we consider in a broader picture. But when we go through it as an a la carte menu and cut the things that we want to cut without recognizing the increases that need to be there elsewhere. Food services, great example. Catastrophic insurance, another great example. The only reason that the full model right now at its funding level remains constitutional is because of its aggregate funding model or level, excuse me. In fact, the last 3 recalibrations that I've sat through recommend a substantially higher total amount of money. So I understand that this, if we were sitting down and trying to make it cost-based, I think there's a decent argument that this could be a cost-based solution. But at the end of all of these votes, the aggregate of the votes is going to be a lower amount of money to a block grant. And, you know, I've been doing this for 10 years. In my view, that's unconstitutional.
Okay.
Question?
Question being called. I will respond so briefly before we get to the question. It seems to me that we do have the obligation to be efficient. The mechanism we have for doing that is doing things exactly this way. And I do think that we have not a constitutional obligation, but a constitutional right as the elected representatives of the people to see that things are done efficiently and that our people are not unduly taxed. And that's a balancing that we have to strike and no other branch of government can. So with that, the question is on the first division of the amendment. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
That carried. That was the Cinder Brightman. That was the groundskeeper piece. Are you going to be able to stay with us, or have you got to be in another committee?
We got 2 other bills I have to do. I'm gonna leave a proxy.
May the God of bills be with you.
With that? Yeah, thank you.
Okay. I appreciate the.
Senator Scott, so are are we voting on the first?
The
The
first,
amendment that
first,
Senator Ellis
first
moved?
division of the First Amendment. And it carried 2-1. The second division is eliminating the across-the-board cut. Any discussion?
Question.
Question being called. All those in favor? Aye.
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 3 ayes on that one. So all of the First Amendment is carried. The Second Amendment is implements the basing the ADM on not the 3-year rolling average, but on the last year, except that you see the language at the bottom due to the impacts of COVID. We're going to compute that based on 2019, 2020, when we don't think we've seen much of the way of COVID's impacts in that figure. And we think that's more reliable. So that's what that does. There is a significant savings with it. Just the luxury of the gradual implementation is enrollments decline. We can't afford anymore is the thinking. So, do I hear a motion on the amendment?
Move the amendment.
Amendment's moved. Discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay, that carried. Next one, item 3. What this one does is we put in, this is the regional cost adjustment. We go from having a choice of 3 different ones to saying we're going to use the 2020 hedonic wage resource index. And we're going to update that. And that's what this one does. My notes are that that is in fact a recommendation that we got from one of the consultants to use that particular wage index and to keep it up to date. So that's what that does.
Mr. Chairman.
And go ahead, Senator Ruffus.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And my apologies for not being here for the detailed description of this, but does this eliminate the 3-part test and go strictly with the hedonic wage index purely?
Yes, that's what it does.
Is there a minimum of 1 or does it allow it to go negative? I assume
It
if there's a
allows it to go
savings, it allows it to go negative. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll just note that this is explicitly unconstitutional, even though I don't agree with the analysis. I mean, this is an area where I don't find the analysis of the Campbell decision that makes this explicitly unconstitutional particularly compelling, but it's explicitly unconstitutional according to the decision.
I don't think that's right.
That's fine.
I don't see anything in the Constitution that mandates us to use one formula
Right.
or another.
Mr. Chairman, it's not explicit in the Constitution, but I would suggest that stare decisis would lead to the court reflecting upon its prior court decisions, which explicitly make this unconstitutional as an approach, because in their analysis, they say that none of the districts can be adjusted below the base district funding model. We've had an unbelievable amount of discussion and testimony about this over the last 10 years. And I'm not going to recount it all right now because it would take the rest of the day. But we were all pretty confident, and the AG's office was pretty confident that if we lowered anyone below 1.0 as the multiplier, that they would immediately win the lawsuit, which is why we didn't do it. So I'm a no.
Just disagree on that. It seems to me that if you're going to be efficient, you've got to do some of that sort of thing. You know, you can't have everybody above average. It just doesn't work.
Mr. Chairman, one quick follow-up on that. I agree with you. As I said, this is not the analysis. This is one piece of analysis in this decision that I didn't find mathematically sound. But that doesn't mean it wasn't their decision. I disagree with Supreme Court decisions all the time, but it doesn't make me right, unfortunately, in the eyes of justice.
Mr. Chairman, just a comment. I think I've received a few texts from people who are trying to listen in and they say the audio's a little terrible. So we'll just make a better effort to turn off our mics so there's not that bounce around sound.
Okay.
And just one point, Mr. Chairman, on the discussion, fact scenarios change. If the work we're doing is challenged again, I just think that we're at a different place where court analysis might look very different. So I just want to push on that notion a little bit. Courts tend to reverse or have reversed themselves in other instances. So I just think we need to be knowledgeable and cautious, but I don't share the concerns that the good senator from Albany County does.
Yeah, on that, this is just general, so I won't have to repeat it again. I know that in general, the Senate itself has decided that the analysis of the court needs to be overturned, and therefore I think has asserted that it will be. And I would say that there's some plausibility of that if in any way at any point in time over the time between when the Campbell decisions were passed and now, the legislature had in any way tried to comply with the obligation to increase revenue to meet the costs of the funding model. But to the extent that there was never any, to my knowledge, appreciable revenue increase, anything to recognize the declining revenues associated with the mineral industry, I don't know why the court would feel in any way obligated to change based on changing circumstances. This didn't sneak up on us. I've been talking about it for 10 years. We've known this was coming. We've known all the solutions. They're all on the table. We talk about them all the time. There are bills out there that would solve this problem. So why the court would feel somehow obligated or guilted into deferring to us when we didn't follow through on any of the guidance they provided on maintaining a cost-based, equitable system and then providing sufficient funding for it. They explicitly say a lack of revenue will not be taken as an excuse. I mean, those words are in the decision.
Yeah.
I don't know why they would change their mind on that. They could. I could be wrong. Again, I've been on the wrong side of at least like 2 Supreme Court decisions in Wyoming and maybe 3, I'm not sure. So we'll see.
Seemed to me that the revenue issue is a separate issue. And it has to do with the adequacy of all the services we provide. We, in our representative form of government, we're going to get philosophical here for a minute. It is the duty of the legislative branch to decide the balance between spending and taxation. And it's our duty because the people can replace us if we get it wrong. They're the ultimate judge of the adequacy of things. And so that's our responsibility. I don't think any other group other than the people can tell us what to do about revenue. Make it stick. That's our judgment. And this is not a revenue raising bill, cannot be because it's in the Senate. So we've got to take the world as it is and do what we can to be efficient here. And on the legal issue, I hope the court will agree with your mathematical analysis. You have a certain training in that that they don't have.
That is true.
Getting back to it, the question is, should we adopt the amendment?
Question.
Question being called. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay, that carried. Amendment number 4. This, it's fairly lengthy. And I will say to the audience, we passed out last meeting a sheet that showed how much each one of these affected the model. 2 cautions about that. It hasn't been updated. So for instance, on the last last one, the savings wouldn't be the same as what showed there. I don't know what they would be. But it's somewhat out of date, and there's an interplay among the top ones. They were calculated based on single changes, but they often, doing one will often remove some of the savings and doing another so that you don't double count them. So you have to look at it that way too. This one is relatively small amount. It's 10% of the activity budget, which is sports plus some other things like debate and that sort of thing. And that's what it is. I'll move the amendment. I think it's useful. It's the kind of things that we can do safely because the activity item is, I understand, funded at a much higher level. And in tough times, I think it's the way we can be economical and efficient. So that's what this amendment does in discussion. Question being called. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
Amendment number 5. This is the summer school, and I believe also extended school day line item. There was a proposal that we got from Representative Simpson that would have removed this line, that would have cut this twice the amount. Frankly, we talked, Affy and I, to R.J. Cost, Senator, who's got considerable experience in this area, and got some advice that what was really productive in this area was the reading, summer reading program for particularly the kindergartners. That reading recovery was well worthwhile. 3-week program, he said, in the summer, and really showed results, and that the graduation credit recovery programs were also particularly valuable. Students who needed another credit or two to graduate with their high school class. So it retained that, and the result is about half the savings that was proposed in Representative Simpson's model. So that's what this does. RJ's had a lot of practical experience, and we listened to him. And the language there is that we're encouraging the districts to give priority to those two features. So that one moved.
Move the bill or move the amendment?
Amendment. Any further discussion on that?
Question.
Question being called. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. 2 ayes. Okay, that carried. Okay, this one, amendment number 6. Implements a reduction of instructional facilitators to actual. They're also called instructional coaches in the bill, we're here in the part of the bill where what has been attachment A is being codified. what happened, again, we borrowed this one from Representative Simpson, but I understand that LSO staff did the work on staffing it out. It takes these people to not quite, the formula he's got here doesn't quite take them down to the actual use. So there's some leeway for temporary vacancies. And basically, we're relying on, my understanding is the courts have relied in the past. I'm sure they have, having done an analysis of Campbell one in this area. In general, they've relied on what the actual costs have been out there, and we're just not using this one as much as we might. So that's why this is here.
Mr. Chairman.
Send her office.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just on that point, the consultant model recommends a lot more instructional facilitators than we fund in the legislative model. And you want to show, there you go, Mike's off, good. Okay, nope, they've got it. And in the consultant's view, the model that they put forward for us to consider and take as cost-based really has a substantially higher number. And I can't remember exactly what it comes out to per prototypical school, but what's happened over the last 5 years as we've started to cut the funding model is we are the reason why there aren't many instructional facilitators left. We cut about a third of them, and then we cut another third of them. And we've taken out about $100 million worth of wealth relative to what it was 5-ish, 6 years ago. Might even be 7 years ago now in the model. So when schools scale back, the instructional facilitators are easier for them to eliminate than classroom teachers. So the conclusion that we're not using them is effectively a biased study that then leads to a conclusion where we put the forcing function on the system over the last 7 years, and now we conclude that they don't want them anymore. Some districts really like instructional facilitators, others don't, and that's what we've heard over the years. But the consultant model that's proposed is very heavy on them for the professional learning communities, and there's substantial evidence-based data out there and journal and peer-reviewed work that suggests that this is an effective system, which again is why it's evidence-based for us to have these instructional facilitators. So we talk about cost-based, but I just wanted to use this as a point to accentuate the idea that it has to be cost-based, but it also has to be evidence-based. And the consulting model that we're working from suggests that these are an essential characteristic. So I just wanted to provide that little bit of background, that to conclude that just because they're not using them now, nobody wants them. We've been starving them for quite a while in terms of diminishing their block grant, and they've had to let people go.
But we're in the block grant model now. They're not. I swear one of these days I'm going to bring a big farm hammer to use on these microphones.
I hope I'm there for it.
The audiovisual system we've got is not thoroughly broken in and has its difficulties. I have great difficulty turning that thing on and off. The point I would make on that is that there's a figure in the model and they aren't coming close to it. And the districts are choosing not to. And so that's why this is there. We're coming back, and we're doing this in a number of places, coming back to what the reality of the school districts on the ground are actually seeming to do.
One more point though on that, Mr. Chairman, and I know you reflect this in one of the sides of this paper. It gets back to the a la carte menu approach. We can't embrace reality on the ground 50% of the time and then pretend reality on the ground doesn't exist the other 50% of the time, when this one saves us money and this one costs us money. Salaries are ridiculously off model. $5,000 to $7,000 per teacher off model.
We'll get to that.
I understand, and you've got the $55 million here. Even this is a cut from several years ago. But that's just one point. There are a lot of things that are not in the legislative model that school districts spend money on. So that's why we do recalibration overall. That's why we do it holistically. That's why we've always resisted on recalibration until this year. The idea that we would treat it like an a la carte menu and embrace things that allow us to cut while rejecting things that require us to expand because it's not cost-based. So again, on this one, I mean, we can say it, we can do it, and we can put some rhetoric around it that makes it seem reasonable, but at the end of the day, it's a cut to a block grant where the block grant's going to go below the cost basis. So I'll stop there.
Okay, we just have a fundamental difference, I think, on the way to approach here. It does sound to me like you're always in favor of an increase and always opposed to a cut. And you don't like the across the board means of cutting it. I think you're right on that. And the alternative to that is you go through and look at the individual pieces and increase them and decrease them as the case may be. And that's what we're doing.
Mr. Chairman, one quick response to that. Consolidation is fully constitutional. It increases efficiency. It leads to a cut. There are other efficiencies that are cost-based, evidence-based, and lead to savings or improvements. So the idea that I'm always against anything that improves efficiency is not accurate. Am I going to want to cut the model? Probably never. That's accurate. Because to me, we've cut it $100 million over the last 5 years while providing no additional revenue. It seems like it's time to provide additional revenue, and I'm not going to cut another dollar, but I'm all over improvements. I'm all over improved efficiencies, making education better, doing more for the kids with the same amount of money, all of those things I can be fully supportive of. But the focus of this process is not to make education better. What we're doing here has nothing about making education better that underlies it. This is strictly about cutting the budget, and that's not going to be cost-based or evidence-based. So a lot of it gets to the methodology, and Mr. Chairman, you're right. We're going to fundamentally disagree on some of these things.
Yeah. And it is a fundamental disagreement. And I was taking you at your word saying you weren't going to vote for any cuts in the thing.
True. Because those amendments are here.
Okay. The next,
Mr. Chairman?
okay, we gotta,
Yeah, I
yeah,
just said, I don't think we did anything on
and
that.
that one. So
Question?
the, and move, question is, should we pass amendment number 6 relating to the instructional facilitators or instructional coaches, depending on what terminology you use? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay. Amendment number 7. This one is, okay, this one is in the area of student transportation, the busing. What it does is it goes back to 1819 as a base year, so totally pre-COVID. And use that a base year and say we can get by with 90% of the expenditures of that year. This frankly is the something I think we need to do. When you reimburse something 100%, it tends to grow and grow and grow without bounds and without reason. And I hear multiple complaints from my constituents over this issue, that we've let the busing get out of hand It has encouraged us to a system in athletics in traveling all over the state to play games, taking the kids out of the classrooms too much. This is one of the cuts I think will improve the quality of learning in the classroom. So that's what this does. Let's take a look at page, yeah, it also, that's what I thought. It also deletes entirely the part of the bill relating to special education. That was aimed at getting the Medicaid program involved in paying some of the costs, shifting some of our costs to the federal government. The Appropriations Committee has taken that one on, and we have passed that on third reading now, have we not? The appropriations bill, I think we have.
Yeah.
And so if they're handling it, we don't need to, so that's why the special education part is coming into out entirely.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Ellis?
does this amendment deal with appeals as well for transportation reimbursement?
Yeah, it takes those out. It's essentially says 90%, and we were afraid the appeal process might undo the value of the amendment. They do have significant reserves if they really get in a bind, but basically it's gotten enough out of hand. There is a companion piece to this in the bill, which is section 6, I believe, at the back, that puts a 2-year sunset on this. That may be in a different section, but it's there. And then the section 6 at the back charges the Joint Interim Education Committee with developing a formula over the next 2 years. And the sunset is designed, there was some public testimony on that issue on Monday that I thought was fairly misguided. We aren't ending the transportation program at that. You put a sunset in on something you know you can't end to drive a bill implementing the fix. So that's a legislative tactic. But the idea is to look at the various parameters and get a reasonable formula so you don't have the continuous escalation aspect that 100% reimbursement just automatically produces. So that's what that does. Comments?
Mr. Chairman?
Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How would I divide this? I think Division 1 for special education would be lines 1 through 4 and 15 through 19. And I think transportation is isolated to 5 through 14. Is that accurate?
I think so, yeah. I'll take your word on 1 through 4, which is the technical introduction section. And the transportation is the one in the center. 60 pages, reference page 60, 61, 62 are special.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, I think that the only thing that's happening in 1 through 4 is the repeal in the original language, the repeal of 2113-321, or are we amended? That's an amendment, actually. Sorry, so that's amending through, and we're deleting the amendment of that in 15 through 19, as I understand it.
Yeah.
So we need, those two go together. Okay, I think that's accurate. All right, thank you. So I'd ask that it be divided as described.
Okay, we'll deal with getting rid of the special ed first.
Mr. Chairman, just for clarification for LSO staff, can you repeat the division again?
Absolutely. So, Mr. Chairman, and I guess I assume there's a motion on the bill because we haven't technically done that. That's the wrong order. There we go. All right, so
Yeah.
motion on the amendment, my apologies. All right, so I'd ask that the amendment be divided where Division 1 is lines 1 through 4 and lines 15 through 19, and that is the special education division. Division 2 is lines 5 through 14, and that is the transportation division.
Okay,
And call for the question on Division 1.
okay. Division 1 is the special education deletion. And just so nobody in the audience or online gets confused, when we say we're deleting it, we're removing it from the bill, which leaves the law as it normally would leave the law as it would be, but now the law is, it's in attachment A, and I think, and we're putting it into the statute. So that's what this does. All those in favor of Division 1, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carried 3-0 on transportation. Any comments, Andrelis?
Division 2.
Division 2. Andrelis. Cinderophis? Okay, on transportation, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay, that carried too, so the whole thing carried. Yep. Staff, so we don't need to worry about the division. Item 8, this is similar to the instructional facilitators. There's tutors in there that are being underutilized. Again, we're borrowing from Representative Simpson's work. What this does is takes the tutors back to slightly above what's actually being used. The arguments are about the same as they were on the instructional facilitators.
Yeah, pretend I said them all again.
Okay. Cinderella's,
No comments.
okay. Amendments moved. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay. Item 9, this is a major amendment here. What it does is it increases the class size, the objective in the model. The objective here is to eliminate the teachers' reimbursement for the teachers who do not exist and are creating a slush fund. And my understanding is there's a thing called the Crew Report out there that shows where a lot of this money is going. And a lot of it, some of it is going to increase teacher salaries, and we'll deal with that in a minute. But a lot of it is going to the frills, to administration, to some of the athletic programs. And frankly, I think in this case, we're dealing with one of the real problems that is keeping our instruction from being better than it is, because we're funding excessive administration. I think that does make work for the classroom teachers. We're funding excessive activities that take the kids out of the classroom too much. And this is a major component of solving that particular problem. There's some other components as well, which we will deal with. I will report to you that you almost need to go in integral units, not fractions of a student here in class size. So we are going slightly over. There are, on the figures that I got from LSO, which are based on the reports that they get from actual from the State Department of Education, the actual is The model provides for 6,840 teachers. Actual is 6,022. The difference is 818. This would remove 901. And so we are starting to reach a little bit into the actual instruction. The alternative is to go too low. And we chose going too high. So that's what this does. We'll get to something later on that deals with the too high. So that's the amendment.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Office.
And not to belabor the point, but I think this is the amendment that really guts education in Wyoming. It's a substantial cost. We know that we've had a challenge where we're not providing sufficient resources for the school districts to simultaneously meet the objective classroom sizes and number of teachers, as you've identified, and the salary, because the model, as mentioned earlier, dramatically underfunds salary. And there's a reality on the ground. Can you hire teachers for the legislative model salary? No. We've had economic analysis that indicates that. And we do that analysis each and every year, and we look at labor market challenges, and it gives us an impression of where we need to be. And we need to be about 10% higher. We also, as I mentioned, there are a number of things that we don't fund in the model. And this cut is the one that is really too painful. And it's not going to change the suggested outcomes of, well, if we do this, then all of a sudden we'll have less money for administration. Nothing here compels that. You'll still have the same administrators. They'll probably still have the same administrative salary, because at the end of the day, that's not a substantial portion of the model expenditures or cost. It just isn't. There's no solution there. That's why we haven't done it. And again, that's one that there's plenty of room there that I would support changes and have over the years in discussions of trying to isolate those administrative and central office salaries so that they're not part of the same funding stream as the classroom teachers. So there are things that we could do policy-wise that would address the suggested ills. This doesn't. This simply eliminates a lot more teachers. If it's $76 million, we're getting rid of over 760 teachers here. These are real people, real jobs. They're not empty positions. This is the kind of cut that leads to 700 plus people in the state of Wyoming that worked before this bill passed, if we were to pass it, that don't have jobs in Wyoming afterwards, that go to some other state. And that's what I would encourage them to do if this is the approach we're going to take to education. So this is the one that really is the game changer. And I think you said it a few minutes ago. This is an important amendment. It is. This is a critical amendment. This is the one that everyone should pay attention to how we vote on. And I'm certainly going to be a no.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly understand the senator from Albany County's concerns. I do. When we looked at the model, we asked school districts to do a 16-to-1 ratio for our young kids, our K through 3. And the expectation was that that would provide more one-on-one time with the teacher and the student in those really critical formative years, especially in things like literacy. But if you look at the average statewide, that's not what happened on the ground. The average was 19-to-1. So I would agree, looking at 17 and going to 20 seems like a huge jump, except when you consider what's actually occurring out there. So I want to just make it known, like, no, I don't like doing this. If oil was strong, if we had a robust coal industry, I'd be content with leaving things as they are. And that's how we've been, very content. But I think what we need to do is really look at what's happening on the ground. And I do want to push back on this notion that it guts education. It is the largest portion of our budget. We spend $1.5 billion. And so I remember a few years ago when we made a reduction of something in like $30 million, I saw the headline in the paper was describing it as a bloodbath. And when it doesn't even reach a 1% or 2% reduction in an overall $1.5 billion budget, I think that's an overcharacterization. And so if you look at what this amendment means in the entire context of education, I just don't want the public to walk away thinking that we're, eliminating half the budget of education. We're really looking at something that's more in line with a 10% reduction, but having a more surgical and evidence-based way of achieving that. I also want to push back a little bit on competing with our surrounding states. We've set up this false proposition that somehow we're going to be able to teach fewer kids, 16-1 in the model, and compete with states like Utah and Idaho that have significantly larger class sizes. If you're going to have those larger class sizes, that's what you're going to see in our surrounding states, is they'll increase salary. And so we can never compete if we don't play with other surrounding states if we don't play by the same rules. So either the expectation is with the model, a lower salary, or higher classrooms with a higher salary. Some of those things just kind of make sense. So I just want to push back that when it comes to how we compete with our surrounding states, there's a trade-off, because there's no way we can continue to fund 16-1 when Utah is, much higher class sizes. We just can't compete when they play by different rules. So I don't think our analysis, when we talk about our region and how we have difficulty attracting teachers, that's one factor. And we've heard that. We've heard that, we can offer a higher salary and fewer kids, and you'll still have people that want to go to our surrounding states, even though it means more work, but a higher salary for them. So that's a trade-off that we need to start have some reckoning with.
I would add to that we're dealing here with one of the major problems we have in our current funding formula. We're funding things that simply do not exist. The notion that we were eliminating 700 and some jobs is just absolutely false. We are getting rid of 818 teachers that simply do not exist. And the money has been used elsewhere for all kinds of things. This is one of the causes of the poor performance we're trying to deal with. And we will get to the salary component on the teachers in a little bit. But the way this is structured, you do these things one at a time. And so for that sort of reason, I'm very much in favor of Senator Office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Money really isn't spent on much else than teachers and jobs in the model. We talk about other things, but at the end of the day, when you look at it, we're basically hiring teachers. We're at a point now where when you cut funding, you're cutting teachers, you're cutting jobs. So I'm not talking about the ghost teacher concept that you laid out. I'm talking about you've got $76,400,000 that this equates to roughly. And when you make that cut, the only place that it can be cut is 760-ish jobs, maybe more than that. But it's humans going to school, right? This isn't the CAPCON budget, and this isn't the paper budget. We don't buy enough paper to cut the paper budget or the textbook budget or the computer budget. So this needs to be, and if you're not seeing it as cutting jobs, I think we're looking at it wrong. And at the same time, the idea that, well, we told the districts you need to go 16-1 and they did 19-1 and they failed, therefore they don't need the money, again, is the one side of the equation. And we've mentioned that I've done a little bit of math in my years. And when you have a fixed number of dollars, and those dollars are to be spent hiring a number of people, you have to multiply that number of people by the number of dollars that each person is going to require, and then try and keep that under the fixed pie of dollars. So why have we had larger class sizes than we intended? Because each and every year that I've worked on the model, the legislative model funding has been below the market cost. It's impossible. It was impossible for the schools to get to 16-1 and 21-1 because we didn't fund the salary side. If we had funded the salary side and they didn't do it, we'd have a lot to complain about. And really, I think a good approach would be trying to, if we were focused on better education instead of focused on budget cuts, we would probably try and find ways to make sure that classroom teachers materialized out of each dollar that we're intending to spend on classroom teachers. Again, that's probably good, efficient policy. But the final thought I have and the final challenge I have is to say that we haven't been doing well enough here and that we've had inefficiencies here. You know, I'm curious to hear an explanation how we're going to increase performance by cutting $76 million here. If we don't like what we're doing now, how does a reduction of $76 million lead to better outcomes? I mean, it does seem like this is the beatings will continue until morale improves type of an approach to trying to get better outcomes. And I don't see any logical progression. Even if I disagree with it, I don't see how the dots connect, where cutting money out of this will lead to better performance in some way. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Philosophy is education designed to teach our young people so they can function effectively in a modern society, or it's the jobs program. And what I see is that we're getting top heavy. We're getting bloated outside of the instructional areas. We have, when you look at the total number of employees, and I intend to get to the bottom of that, but we are, I understand, employing 16,000 across the state, and 6,000 of them are teachers. There's something wrong. We are employing way too many outside the classroom. And I do not look at education as appropriately as a jobs program. I think looking at it that way does degrade the quality. And I guess there's just a fundamental difference of philosophy on this one.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ellis.
I just also disagree. And this is, you know, I respect the senator from Albany County and I understand it, but I don't think that we can say that, you know, if we're just focused on better education and this is about cuts, you know, we have to look at the entire work. And I know that you've served on this committee way more years than I have, Senator. But we have looked at ways, how do we modernize and how do we offer things like computer science to try and, you know, make sure that our kids are having the skills they need. So I don't think you can divorce the work that we've done in prior years that we continue to do in other areas from what we're trying to achieve here today. I think the concern I have, and you've heard this, and I asked the question during your recalibration meetings, though I didn't serve on that committee formally, is how dollars are, where they're being spent. It's not so much how much there is, but where those dollars go. We've talked about school activities. I support that. As a student of myself, I played sports. I was in speech and debate. I understand the value. But when it comes to what our constitutional obligation is, that was the question I raised for recalibration. Those activities are offered to every student, but not every student participates in them. So when you start seeing activities budgets, and I think the recalibration work or the crew report, if I recall correctly, we're spending about 125% of what the model allocates for that. And so we have to hire staff, we're hiring buses and coaches, and you know, there's money that's out there that's being taken away, in my view, from where it should be spent. And that is on quality teachers in classrooms with lower class sizes. And like I said, if the actuals on the ground were right now, we've got K-3 that's got 16-1, I'd be a lot more protective of these numbers. I really would. But that was our expectation, was a strong focus in early literacy. You know, we have those statutes there, and we just don't see that districts are spending money that way. And so that's my concern, is, you know, we can't just keep feeding the beast without, at least in my view, taking a really close look at where those dollars are being spent. And I understand the local control argument, but there's a disconnect there. When I go talk to my constituents, and if we raise property tax or sales tax, I need to be able to look them in the eye and say, we are running a very efficient school system. That's my job and my obligation to taxpayers. And so that's part of this exercise. And so I just think we're going to fundamentally disagree, but I just wanted to push on this notion that all we care about are cuts, because I don't. I care about making sure our kids are learning and having skills they need to compete and beyond high school. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Echo that comment. And I would say that one of the things that is motivating factor here is the amount, at least for me, the amount that I have heard from citizens in Natrona County, and I don't always separate who's my constituent and who isn't. I often don't know when I'm talking to somebody. But I hear complaint after complaint after complaint about excessive spending in the school system. And yes, that is a motivating factor here, that there are major inefficiencies, and we're trying to get to them with this amendment. Senator Office.
These are two different things, and the idea that I don't support increasing the performance or trying to make sure our resources go where they belong, that's not accurate, but these amendments don't do that. That's why I'm saying they're cuts, because all of these amendments are actually cuts. If we wanted to bring amendments that said dollars that were dedicated to K-3 reading have to go to K-3 reading, it reads differently. That's a different amendment. That's an amendment I probably could get behind. And Mr. Chairman, as far as these complaints that you lay out, I've heard them all too. I've heard them for 10 years. We've investigated them on this committee. We've investigated them on recal, and a lot of them have some merit, but nothing we see here solves any of those problems. It just reduces the funding model. There aren't solutions to the problems you've laid out here. And if our focus were trying to increase the efficiency and the academic orientation of what we're doing here, that's the type of thing that I've gotten behind time and again. I was the one who made the motion for the computer science standards years ago. I mean, that's my passion over the years on the education committees. Let's make things better. But we're not going to do that with fewer resources. And Mr. Chairman, the final concept that I would say is there are some districts that come pretty close to the model, or used to when we funded the model. My district's one of those. On the activities budget, we're currently at 95% of the requested activities budget. And Senator Ellis is absolutely right. Statewide, it is around 125%. I think that's probably spot on. My district hits it, 95%. We don't even succeed. We focused on trying to achieve 16-1, but we don't pay enough. So we hit about 16.7 for quite a long time in our K-3. We actually hit the 21 in the higher grades, which we're supposed to. We managed to come pretty bloody close there year in, year out. So we've been pretty successful. And the idea that we're going to come back, we're going to punish my district because apparently some other districts aren't doing it right. Let's take 10% of my district's money away. And I don't know what my district's supposed to take away from that. Having done it right, having succeeded. And then for us to say, no, you're still failing. And we want you to improve your efficiency. And so we're going to take 10% away. See if you can achieve what you achieved before. Again, I just don't see that as accomplishing even the objectives that you've laid out and Senator Ellis have laid out, which I share. I share the same objectives. Let's make Wyoming education as good as it can be. These amendments are cuts. The amendments you're suggesting are ones I could potentially support. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think we better bring this to a vote. I will say one thing, and that is that I've heard that 125% of model on the activities. I've also heard that if the accounting was proper, it was more like 160 to 170%. And I have not been able to prove that, but I suspect it is true. But with that, the question is on amendment number 9. That's been moved, I believe. Question being called. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay, not carried. Amendment number 10. Okay, this is another major amendment here. This is on health insurance. The current system is that for all employees, that is all employees, I think, that are half-time or more, we reimburse the districts under the model on a formula that assumes that they all take the health insurance benefit and that it costs as much as the state employees plan does. The figures I was given by the LSO show that there are 27 point something, I forget what the point something is, but 27+% of the employees that do not take the health insurance. And there's a small number that, for one reason or another, are counted twice the way the mechanics of the model works, and they're getting full. Districts are being reimbursed the full amount twice. What this does is it reduces it to we pay only for the health insurance for employees that are actually there. It's a major source of diversion to other subjects, other purposes, often outside the academic area. And that's what this does. There's a second problem. The state employees plan has been and still is quite rich compared to what's available. And a number of the school districts have chosen, I think all but mine, have chosen to avoid the state plan because it is so expensive, and offer a lesser amount. There's an obvious trade-off between salary and insurance benefits. But what this does is reduce it to just the people that actually get it. It doesn't deal with the other problem. So that's the amendment. Comments?
Question.
Question being called. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay. Well, at least you're consistent.
As long as I'm reading them right.
Yeah, you're, okay. This next one is a twofer. We're doing two things to the same piece. And there's an alternative. Amendment number 11 implements higher teacher salaries and removes 5 professional days. The intention on going to the higher teacher salaries was to get us back to what is actually being spent out there. I understand it falls a little short of that. It's not as much as if you compute it as a standalone, because there's an interaction. When we removed, as we just did, the ghost teachers, that reduces the amount of money you need. And then we did propose this 5 professional days. We initially looked at taking out 3 of them. But the advice we got from a number of the educators was that they weren't being used that way, that the offerings were not good. The teachers were doing it on their own time in the summer, and that frankly, it was a waste of time. So if you want to just remove the 5 teacher days without getting the increase in teacher salaries, that's amendment number 12. I would propose we deal with amendment number 11, because I think restoring, and it's a big money item. My memories, it's in the vicinity of 55 million. So that we've been hearing complaints that the model was inadequate. Well, the model assumed a different set of trade-offs there, resulted in not being implemented. And the districts have chosen to go with a little higher workload and a higher salary. And this recognizes that. So this is the increase item. Moves amendment number 11 is moved.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Ruffus.
I'd ask to divide it at line 21,
Divide it at line 21.
division 1 being 1 through 21, and division 2 being the balance.
I think they are so intertwined that the number figures in Division 1 are, your proposed Division 1 are reflecting your Division 2. That's the reason it's combined as opposed to being separate amendments. The increase and the reduction in the teacher days changes the same number the way the model is structured. And I don't think it's divisible.
Mr. Chairman, I would suggest that it's divisible even if there is a confluence in how the numbers were calculated. Division
Okay.
1 increases the teacher salary to something that's close to the market. Even if it was reduced by 5 days, it's still substantially closer
Okay.
to market value than it is now. Whereas Division 2 is simply the reduction of the school days for contract.
Okay, I won't argue the point too lengthily. I think we ought to pass both of the divisions. But
I'm going to vote for one of them. And I suspect they'll both pass.
Okay, question is on Division 1, which is the first 21 lines. That does implement the teacher increase. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That carried. Division 2 is the rest of this.
You turn off your microphone, Chris.
Sorry about that. Thanks.
The question is on, in further discussion, question is in Division 2. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay, Division 2 is passed. I would urge that we do not consider the amendment number 12, which was doing the professional day cuts without the salary increase. Amendment number 13. What this amendment does is we have a provision in the bill that limits the salary to 100, maximum, caps the maximum salary at 105,000 a year. This amendment moves that to 130,000. There was circulated some material that shows moving it to 115. We had understood that was the recommendation of the consultants. But that proved to be, when we investigated that proved to be confusion of an average figure with the consultant's maximum recommendation. And the 130,400 that you see here is, I'm told, the recommendation of the consultant in this area for the maximum salary for superintendents. Now, superintendents being the highest paid, that's where we've set the maximum. But it applies to more than superintendents, the amendment does. And then the next item in the amendment on page 49, line 10, we're throwing in the extra that's above the normal benefits and including those in the salary component. So they're subject to the limit as well. That's what the amendment does.
Question on the amendment?
Okay, amendment's moved. And they call for the question. Any discussion? I do think it's important. This is one of the places where the money's been diverted from classroom teaching is going. So,
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Office.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. The concern I have is the maximum recommendation by the consultants definitely does not include the information that you've got at the bottom. So the concept of having some cap is trying to provide some fidelity with the model. So that the first part of this is probably justified cost-based. And then all of a sudden you've got everything after line 11 and you've defeated the cost basis of it. So I guess let's see, will it work if I divide? Yes, it will. I'm going to divide this one after line 10. So division 1 will be lines 1 through 10. Division 2, Mr. Chairman, would be lines 11 through 19. And yeah, that looks like it separates out just fine. So the first division is changing the number 105 to 134, 130,400, and I'll support that one. The second one clearly deviates from cost basis, so that'll at least give me a clean vote.
Okay. You're at least consistent, Chris. Question on Division 1. All those in favor of Division 1, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Division 2. All those in favor of
Mr.
Division.
Chairman, just some explanation.
Okay.
I just,
Cinderella's.
the purpose of having this was we heard from one of the districts out there that the superintendents are making the model salary or close to it, but then learned that the district was also providing for a housing stipend of a significant amount, a vehicle stipend. And so the intent is to reflect kind of what's accurately and providing some of that consistency. Certainly not all districts do that, but we want to know that real number. And so those are things of value that should be considered when you're talking about things that aren't your health insurance or retirement benefits. These are clearly items of value that should be profiled, if you will.
Mr. Chairman, a response to that. I absolutely agree. I've actually been against the idea of having salaries separate from fringe benefits when we do calculations. It is all compensation. We should include it as compensation. That should be fundamental throughout all systems. Totally agree. Math doesn't work out here because those fringe come to between 30 and 40% typically when you pile on for regular employees. It's 30 to 40%. University, it's like 41% fringe, although some of that goes to other things. So when you add Division 2 to what you did in Division 1, you actually end up with less than $105,000 of salary.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to vote for this Division 2 today, but maybe Senator Rothfuss and I can make sure that we've got some clear lines because I don't think the intent is to include health insurance in that calculation. I think our intent was kind of the other things. And I think what we're trying to avoid is a situation where you have someone who's profiled at making 130, the max, but then a $50,000 end of the year bonus or something along those lines. Or the $12,000 extra you get to help your mortgage payment. To me, this was not intended to be health insurance. So I'm going to vote for it today, but let's take a closer look. And if it needs further clarification, perhaps we can work on that down the road.
I will say, double check to make sure we're right. But you see, salary under this paragraph shall not include benefits included under paragraph C, XXXIV of this section. My understanding is that prevents the health insurance from being captured up here. And that's, as I looked it up, that was my understanding. So it is not included in what we're including in salary here. So what it really is these items here that are not generally part of compensation of other employees that are going to some of the top people, because that's what we're limiting. So with that, the question is on Division 2. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
That carried. That's the amendments. I will say, because it's come up quite a bit, that there's a provision in here that we did not need to amend. It's in the bill as introduced. That is further protection for the classroom teaching. And that prevents, it makes the classroom teachers paid under a categorical grant, where if it doesn't go for salary and benefits for the teachers, it reverts to the school foundation fund, And that is designed to prevent funding for the classroom teachers being diverted to other purposes. And that, I think, is very important complement to the other work we've done here, trying to improve the quality of the education that the students are getting, while we're improving the efficiency. And that's a key concept in this bill. It is a departure from the local control, but there appear to have been, to me, to be significant abuses that are hurting the kids in the classroom, and I think it's a necessary corrective on that. That's in the bill. It wasn't reflected in these amendments because it didn't need to be. It's already there. So I wanted to make that clear. Now, are there any further amendments on the bill? Any further discussion of the bill?
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, just along those lines, I think, I visited with their chairman about how do we provide some protections with some of our lower wage employees that work in our schools. Certainly school secretaries, food service staff. I think when we saw some flattening of education funding a few years ago, at least in my district, there was a push to cut the number of janitors. That's the problem with this is, we joke about it but there's nothing funny about it. We like local control until we don't. And, is this a perfect solution? No. I urged us to start looking at other models to see if there's, groups of private citizens that could come together to help us grapple with some of this. Those efforts were defeated to look at whether or not there's a better way. I don't like having to work the model this way. I would much rather, have an approach where, our school boards or teachers associations come to us and say, here's some efficiencies we've identified that we can, wouldn't impact classrooms, wouldn't impact salaries. And I just never hear that. We never have that efficiency discussion. And so I want it to be known, I don't like doing this. But I also think we have a responsibility, and there's a funding level too that we need to maintain. The numbers are big here. We're talking about more or less a $1.5 billion budget being maybe a $1.4 billion budget. So I just don't want to lose sight of the fact that that's a continued significant investment in our kids, and one that I'll defend. And there will be a day when we've done our exercise of doing the efficiency, and I will be there to talk about tax increases. And I do think that we need to look at our property tax structure a little bit more thoroughly. Right now, we've relied at least on revenue that is very dependent on commodities, that's volatile. And then the discussion I've seen in my time on the revenue committee is more of that. How do we get someone else to pay our bills? How do we not pay it as citizens? How do we, do all this, we'll trigger this and then this will happen with the tax. And, it's a straightforward conversation. Property tax is one of the more stable sources of tax revenue. But I just think we need to do this work before we can legitimately ask our taxpayers to absorb any increased cost. And my biggest concern has been the sustainability. Because when you do look at education and, we say we cut it every year, but if you look at a chart, it just goes up. I just worry about how we ever keep track of that. If we had a model that was in check and that we could check and that we did this kind of a painful work regularly to keep it in line with what those revenues generate, and there's some matchup, I'd be much more willing to support something like a property tax. But my concern has long been that if we bridge the gap in 5 years, we'll be back to the same conversation of needing more revenue for education, because it just grows at a rate that we can't keep up with. And a big driver of that's health insurance. That's another issue for another day, but there's just a lot to this. And so I just want the folks listening, watching, and paying attention to know that, this isn't an arbitrary thing that we've just come to, I think. And I know visiting with Senator Scott, we've talked about the right way, the responsible way. And my biggest concern is if we don't do this now, we continue to fund education at the current levels, we don't have any new revenue sources coming out of our legislature, we are looking at massive 30% cuts in the future. And I want to avoid that, because that could be very catastrophic for some of our districts with losses of significant employment. So Mr. Chairman, I wanted to make those comments, and if anyone has ideas for efficiencies, the hard part is, this is the model we work from. But I would hope that our districts would listen to teachers and staff and other people working in our schools to find those and find ways that won't impact our students' quality of learning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ruffus, you want to make any general comments?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll note what I noted the other day on the floor, which is that we are fully empowered to fix this problem and solve it. We are fully empowered to do so without causing any pain, without reducing the quality of education in the state. We're the only group in the state that's empowered to do so. The governor can't do it. The schools can't do it. Counties can't do it. Communities can't do it. The Wyoming legislature has the authority to bridge the gap by increasing revenue. The entirety of the time that I've been in the legislature, which is certainly not as long as you've been in the legislature, good chairman, you spoke to my high school class. I don't know if you know that. When I was a senior in high school in English, you came and spoke to my class. It was a good high school then, it's a good high school now.
That would have been in Natrona County.
It sure would have. Yes, indeed. Mr. Chairman, the whole time I've been in the legislature, we've known this day was coming, although many wanted to deny it out of hope that coal would last forever and that maybe we'd just get out of the legislature before we had to solve the problem, then it'd be somebody else's problem. But it doesn't come as a surprise. And for the past 5, 6, 7 years I've been in the legislature, we have cut education. Now, it doesn't look like it's being cut because, as Senator Ellis pointed out, healthcare costs go up faster than the cuts. ADM went up for a while also, the number, which obviously is going to drive increases. But when you control for ADM and when you take out the healthcare costs, dollars per ADM has actually been going down. We've decreased. We can get the data. I can get it again for you. I've gotten it about 5 times in the last 10 years so that I can look at it. We've done nothing to solve the cost of healthcare, so it looks like educational costs are going up. But in fact, that's not the case. So we've forced requirements to improve efficiencies on them by effectively reducing what we've paid out by around $100 million in value, educational value, not dollars, but education directed dollars. And I think there is more we can do with efficiencies if that were what we were focused on. But the mandate to the legislature for the past few years really has been a focus on cuts. And every time we talk, we start off with, well, if we can't raise revenue, we have to cut. So from my viewpoint, which I know not everyone agrees with, unfortunately, we'll keep trying. From my viewpoint, that's an immediate surrender. That basically looks to the fact that, as Senator Ellis pointed out, we did enjoy the mineral extractive industry, coal, oil, and gas, and other minerals paying substantial wealth to us so that we could build schools even and fully fund the model. While the rest of us, individuals, have abrogated our responsibilities to pay our way and pay our share. As I said on the floor, I don't get taxed much of anything by the state of Wyoming for my consulting work. I don't know that I pay more than $150 a year to the state of Wyoming for the work that I do. I'd be okay with a little more. And I think given a choice between paying for education or cutting education but keeping our low taxes, most of the people faced with a true knowledge of what's going on would also support continuation of our excellence in education, but they don't hear what's truly going on. They don't understand that we've got a high quality system of education. They believe there are inefficiencies. They see the bus driving down the road with only 6 athletes on it, and they think that they can extrapolate to the entire system from that one bus. And that's a challenge for us. And it's a challenge that, again, we haven't taken on. We've gone along with those narratives and talking points. And that leads to the public really not understanding where we are and what value we're giving to our children. I have 4 kids in our education system. They've had an exceptional education. Cora hasn't actually started yet. She'll be starting in the fall. And it's an amazing opportunity for them if we can maintain it. It's the best thing we do in Wyoming right now. We don't have a lot, honestly, going for us at this challenging time, but our education system remains exceptional. We, as the legislature, should be rising to the challenge put before us to raise revenue. And again, I understand that many legislators feel that if we aren't going to raise taxes and we're not going to support taxes, that we have an obligation to cut to balance the budget. And with that basis, with those assumptions in place, I guess you can't conclude otherwise. But Mr. Chairman, I'm signed on to more tax bills than I can count. I can't even tell you how many I'm signed on to. I need to go check. One of those is an income tax that fully and completely funds this model and provides enough additional revenue to fund early childhood education. And it's a 4% statewide income tax, whereas you know better than I know, any other taxes you pay would count towards that. So most people would only pay about 1% income tax. Generates over $330 million a year because it turns out we've got some incredible wealth in certain corners of this state that aren't paying their share. $330 million bucks a year, that solves this problem. And all we lack is the political will to ask everyone to pay a little bit more and to maybe more closely approach their fair share. But instead, we're bringing bills like this, bills that cut, bills that hurt. And I'm not going to support this one either, Mr. Chairman. But I appreciate the time, appreciate the discussion, and I'd call for the question if you don't have any comments, but you
Well,
probably do,
I
Mr.
will-
Chairman.
I will
Yep.
make a few comments partly in response to that. You know, I know that, and you've been consistent over the years, you want to give us any kind of tax you can find, including an income tax. We represent constituents that feel very differently. Mine are violently opposed to income taxes in particular, and pretty skeptical about taxes in general, and the majority of them. So that is a difference. That's why we have a representative government, is to reflect the will of the people on that subject. And that is the duty of the legislature, to reflect the will of the people on that subject. That's why we're subject to relatively frequent, with senators every 4 years, to every 2 years in the House, frequent elections. The founding fathers talked about, should they go to a 1-year term to get the will of the people a little better reflected. The compromise that they made and that we have largely followed, I think is a better solution, but it does retain popular control over that issue. That's fundamental to our system of government. The people I represent, what I hear about, I do hear complaints about the taxation. Most of them understand it's pretty reasonable, but I do hear some complaints about it, particularly when I'm in the neighborhoods I represent that are living on a fixed income, and a tax would be a real burden on them. The point I would make, when you back up and look at this bill overall, if this bill passes, we will reduce the total education budgets in the vicinity of 10%. And I say vicinity because we haven't costed these out exactly yet. We costed out their predecessor ideas and have a pretty good notion. But we've been focused more on, does it improve the efficiency? Does it improve the overall result? Then we have the exact bottom line. But the bottom line is going to be, if this were to pass, in the vicinity of 10%. It's been my observation, working for the government, federal government, for 5 years, serving here for now I'm in my 43rd year, that the government and most human activities, in the days when there's plenty of money, you get fat and get a bit lazy, and you do things that didn't work out, were a good idea, you tried, they didn't work out, you don't get rid of them, you just move on. And things build up that just don't work. or are they less than efficient? And the advantage of having a periodic downturn is that it gives you the political ability to get the machinery back to an efficient mode. And I don't think, when you've got to look at not only the individual pictures, which we've been looking at, that's the system we've got that's been forced on us, that we haven't been able to change. I think it'll take a constitutional amendment to really change it. But the system's been forced on us. We do have to look at the details and go through the model and say, this piece isn't working, this piece is overfunded, et cetera. But you have to back up and take an overall look. And, you know, schools, school boards, school administrators, this is a large human organization and it behaves like it. And in the flush times, and they've been flush times, we have developed quite a number of excesses. And now we have to get those out of there. And I think we'll have a better system when it's all said and done. Because I think some of the places where the money has been diverted here have been harmful to the classroom instruction. And I am not satisfied with the quality. And I've got a paper I will circulate that goes through what basically is based on what's in the consultant's report and analyzes that and says it's just not adequate. But read the recalibration reports. And they come back to the theme 3 times. We're not getting our money's worth. And I cited the specific page and quote on that in the recalibration report on Monday. They say that the assessment tests are showing that we are not producing the kind of results that adequately educate our kids for the modern world. And we've got to do something about that. This is a first step. I think the consultant's report, the recalibration consultant's report, is a clear illustration that just throwing money at the problem does not work. You have to have a certain basics. 10% cut does not jeopardize that. This will result in better education. Now, the committee is going to have its hands full for the next few years because I hope that y'all will join me in trying to drive to try to improve the results. And I come to you as one who has worked on that in the past, had some legislation 20 years ago on trying to improve the reading results in the early grades. I was the sponsor of the Hathaway Scholarship Bill. And one of our objectives in that whole process was to try to improve the learning in the high school and lesser extent in the middle school level by giving the kids an incentive to study hard and get the most out of their education. And it is in part achieved that. It's not, we didn't get everything we wanted, but that was an attempt to deal with that. We need to pursue some of the things in the quality of our education further. But I think this is a first step. Get rid of the excesses. And I do not think if we do not do that, the electorate will tolerate tax increases. They see the abuses and I hear about them. And those are the ultimate judges of our work. And we will face them. Those of us who are just reelected will face them in 4 years if we choose to run again. Those of you who are holdovers will face them in 2 years. So you got to represent your constituency too. So, and that's our duty as I see it. With that, we do have, we're short enough on time. I had an experience yesterday. We just can't run these committees as close to the going in time as we used to before they redid the Capitol. We need to bring this to a close. Do I hear a motion on the bill? Motion is due pass as amended. Further discussion? I think we've done further discussion. Call the roll, please. And do you have proxies from the other two?
I do.
Okay, I'm disappointed they weren't unable to get back for this, but that's the way it is.
On Senate File 143, Senator Beitman and Senator Salazar left their proxies of aye on this bill.
Okay,
Senator Ellis. Aye. Senator Rothfuss.
No.
And Chairman Scott.
aye.
So Senate File 143 passes as amended 4-1.
Okay, thank you very much. We could spend about 3 minutes on Senate Joint Resolution 4. We'll do that. That's not enough to get very far, so we'll come to that bill first thing Friday morning. We'll look for some other bills to put up, so I'm open to advice on that. I frankly have been so concentrated on this one and the others, that 3 major ones we did, that I have been ignoring the other bills.
I don't even know what else we've got here.
Yeah. Lavelle, could you get me in due course of time, a list of the other bills that have been assigned to this committee?
Senator Scott, we only have one other bill in our bill log at this time. It's Senate File 138.
That's your bill, Sandra. So that will be on the agenda for Friday as well. So that gives everybody notice on that. We'll have a formal notice in due course of time. Okay, meeting is adjourned.